Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Connecting Dots podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Usama, and our conversation today would be centered around the topic of transformation. Today's guest, Claire, has joined us all the way from Cairo, Egypt, and she's someone who initially started her career in a very technical role, such as that of a solutions architect. But then, over the course of her professional journey, he has successfully reimagined and reinvented herself to be a people's person, to be a people's leader, and to be someone who can successfully work in a role that is not only of high impact, but then has a significantly large footprint too. So if you're trying to get more clarity on your professional journey, or if you feel overwhelmed, or in case if you just want to hear someone else's success story, we sincerely hope that this conversation would really help you in anchoring yourself around your ideation and your thought process, and how you can possibly rebrand yourself and to be successful in your professional journey. So with that, Claire, we're very happy to have you on board today. And how had your day been so far?
Thank you, Osama. My day has been great. It's actually PM here, so we had a long day. It has been fruitful and sunny.
Excellent. So Claire, first of all, let's get started. Now that you're at this leadership position, and now when you look back at your journey, and you look at all those years where you've been working in a lot of different roles, in a retrospective, how do you feel about the journey, and how did that transformation happen for you overall?
Like you rightfully said, it has been a transformation journey. If we go back to university years, I've studied engineering, and this is how I got into Ericsson. As you said, SA is solution architect, if anyone don't know that. So I started off in Ericsson as a solution architect, and close to a couple of years down the lane, I had one of my biggest career realizations. It's just like it hit me that just because I became an engineer for wrong reasons doesn't mean I continue being one for wronger reasons. And wronger here means because it didn't work for me. So I was very grateful to my studying years in engineering. I've learned a lot of, problem solving, troubleshooting, time management, project management, of course, aside from the technical information. But then there was a very important aspect for me that was still missing. It was people and connection. And that's when I actually hopped into sales. It was more of a tryout for me in sales, and I did pretty well. But then I actually moved into HR, marketing, and communication for the vast majority of my corporate years. And this is where the most people connection intense part came in. And this is where you related to finding yourself and relating to your real strength. When we make our university decisions, sometimes we're not fully aware of our potentials, our own, even passion. But then you find it out as you practice, and this is what happened for me. And I'm glad I didn't get stuck in something that didn't work for me.
Right, that's pretty excellent. And now, if we try to connect it to the formal education that you have had over the years, so if I'm understanding correctly, you did do engineering, then you did do some courses in business understanding as well. So while you were in school, how did you envision your life to be? Were you really looking forward to a technical career path, or did you have the realization at that time that reinventions can happen in the world, transformations can happen in the world? So how was that part for you?
Obviously, that was not in mind at the time. I whether that's kind of a declaration. I chose engineering kind of out of exclusion at the time, which was a very unlike me way of decision making. But I knew that I wanted something that has to do with structured thinking, problem solving. It was back then that 20 plus years, it was back then that all the mobile operators were booming and starting. It was the hot field, right? So I wanted to join this winning industry. That was as far as the aspiration has gone at the time. But as I mentioned, the desire to connect with people, the desire to pick other humans' brain was the real motive for me behind any move I have made.
Right, that's pretty impactful. And now, if we specifically talk about the current role of ICE, or I should rather say internal comms and engagements. So, what are the key responsibilities that come with the role? And I want you to share a few sentences about the footprint of such a role in large scale organizations.
Yeah, large scale. So our region extends, it stretches across 70 plus countries, serving 5,000 plus employees. So that's pretty large scale, as you've rightfully mentioned. Uh, the mission of a head of corporate communication and employee engagement is to basically tell the company story internally. So it's telling the story that brings the people together and that steers the organization in the same direction. Same direction of its culture, its values, its strategic objectives. So you can consider yourself a compass in a way. That's a big part of the role. So you need to keep your people informed on the pulse, aware of what's happening, whether internally or externally, aware of the trends and aware of the focus of the business. But you need to all do that all in a very creative and engaging manner. Otherwise, you would hardly get any, share of their brains. So that's the biggest aspect of the role. Another very important building block of the role is leadership communication. So you're also responsible to keep a two-way communication between the leaders and their people, be it actually doing this, availing this communication platforms yourself, or coaching the leaders and training them, equipping them with tools that makes them more communicative. And the final block of the role is change management, crisis management, reputation management. It's a lot of communication that hits you in a very timely manner, requires a lot of agility, transparency in the way you address it, so the organization doesn't lag behind.
Right. And Claire, I want to ask you about a few things related to this transformative journey. So when we are currently in an engineering role such as that of an SA, it's an extroverted role, but it's very technology centric role that you work with technology, you work with those kind of engineering leads, engineering people to solve problems. But then now that when you are switching in such a role, which includes a lot of having a lot of conversations with people, having discussions with a lot of different kinds of people with all sorts of backgrounds. So at that time, how did you bridge that gap that you did not have such prior experience before, but then how did you make a compelling case for yourself that you could convince your hiring managers that, hey, although I'm coming from such a role, but then I'm very ambitious and this is what makes me credible to be in such a position that I'm applying for?
Yeah, we need to bear in mind that this transformation happened over a course of time, right? So you actually took in back then, like it was like 15, 17 years ago. So you got a kind of an entry role in communication, just trying yourself out and proving yourself, and then you grow your way up to it. But the most important part in what you said in terms of, I consider this stakeholder management, right? So the most important part of stakeholder management and making a compelling case, as you said, is establishing real connections, like building bridges. And when people hear this, they sometimes it relates to a negative connotation in their brain, like, but this means like being a human chameleon kind of things. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think the catch here is this balance between congruency, and congruency is being true to your real self, knowing who you are, and having anchor your own value system and everything else. The balance with adaptability here means adjusting to the conditions, to the characters, to the environments, to the teams you're joining. So the more this connection becomes seamless and smooth, I think the easier you can make your way into any organization or any team, any transition.
And now, if we are to steer the conversation just a little bit, I want to talk to you about, again, since you are working in a role of comms and engagement, so I want to ask you, over a period of time, with the evolution of technology, how have you seen employee retention trends to be changing, not only in the company that you work for, but with different companies in the same industry?
I would take that a little broader to not only be retention, but also it's talent selection and retention and the entire, employee experience cycle. One of the key changes that happened over time is the set of skills that the employer is looking for. It's the caliber and the talent and the competence. I'm sure you're familiar with the terms T profile and V profile. You know, the T profile is the profile who has a set of broad experiences and skills that allows them to cross collaborate very well, but also has some expertise that makes them, good in their own area. And a V profile is, a profile that is extremely a depth in knowledge, very deep expertise in a specific area, and that works very well for complex projects and so on. So I think organizations and employees are both figuring out how to mix those two, because there's not one that is better than the other. It's more like about the vacancies, the culture, the needs, the leadership position, that enforces a certain specs of choice. And on the employees end, one should always, look at how do they fit into those profiles, what are their strengths, what are their areas of improvement, because that helps them profile themselves better in the job market. So that would be one first thing. The second would be career development and the opportunities that are presented in by the employer. As employers, we look for learners, and those learners, when they find their way into the organization, they are savvy, right? They want to grow, they need to advance, and they need to see opportunities, be it mobility, be it just a change of role, lateral move, upward move. It's just seeking change. So this is something that employers have to address hugely. A third thing is, the whole Gen Z, addressing the Generation Z in terms of finding them where they are, which is online, obviously, being digital natives. They actually enforce an acceleration of the digital transformation inside an organization, and that is quite an evolution also in the talent world. And finally is the benefits. Even the benefits change. Look at the benefit of flexibility and how much it means to the both employer and employee side. The entire landscape of benefits of what matters to both employer and the employee has changed over time. I think that were just to mention few.
No, right. And you've pointed to a very, very interesting point that I sometimes think about as well. So I want to ask you that, are there any such internal trainings across different companies in the ICT industry that would make the managers, the hiring managers, the technical leads more aware of these kind of people coming from different generations? That there are boomers, millennials, and then Gen Z, and all of them have different retention spans. All of them have different strengths, different weaknesses. So are there any such in-house trainings being pushed for that would make hiring managers and tech leads more aware when they're engaging with different kinds of audiences?
I mean, I'm gonna give a bit of a straightforward answer to this one. I mean, do any one of us now want to find a learning opportunity and not know where to? Of course, there are hundreds of trainings, but I mean, who would wait for a training? I mean, I'm a big fan of informal learning myself. I mean, all kinds of development are available out there. Whether if you keep your eyes close to the industry and listen to the podcasts or join the chats or the reads and so on. So I just think that all that is available. It just takes two things. It takes you being curious, because many are trapped in a very, old-fashioned hiring mode. So it just takes the fact that the leader themselves become curious to know more. And the second is them being challengers and challenge the credibility of the information they are receiving. But otherwise, I think everything just avails itself nowadays.
That's perfect. And other than that, Claire, I want to briefly talk to you about the importance of culture as well. So some of these companies are excellent, and even the one that you work with, that they uphold a culture of respect. In that regard, first of all, I want you to talk a little bit about the importance of having a positive culture in a company, and then once you have it set, then what kind of impact would it have on the employees working?
There's this very famous comic that runs all over LinkedIn that people do not leave jobs, they leave managers. I would say people leave cultures, because a proper culture would expose a leader or a manager who are not doing their job. A culture is make it or break it, in a company, because this is what makes you speak up if you're seeing something that is not proper, if you're seeing any kind of disrespect or lack of integrity or unfairness. Culture is what makes people speak up. So it's what creates a safe environment for people to stay and feel sense of belonging. You can never have a sense of belonging without a proper culture that you have nurtured over time. So I mean, culture is my soft spot. I can speak about it forever. And the thing is, culture is the responsibility of everyone, yes, but it is first and foremost the responsibility of the leaders. They are the culture, guards. They are the ones who do not allow the company culture to change and of course in a negative direction. And they are the one who needs to, I would say, police it and make sure that it's happening and put consequences if it's not, and so on.
All right. And Claire, do you have any cool traditions either in the team that you work with or in the company in general that you really like?
I mean, we have many. I mean, in our team, we have the coolest traditions in the team meeting. I think our check-ins is the most valuable, because we always have this time dedicated at the beginning of the team meeting where we check in, and check in is us genuinely checking in about on each other, not on our task lists or projects or what's happening and so on. It's mostly about us genuinely getting to know what is happening on everyone. Speaking of again, culture, teams are communities, right? Community is a group of people who share the same culture and values, and this is how we make sure that the team's culture is preserved. So those check-ins, and we always have our own jokes and games and fun. Fun is a very important part of a team building. You can never have enough fun in a team, and then everything else starts. But if you just start with running into the projects, and it becomes too mechanical, and people would they can be very well performing, but then they don't relate to the place.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about job hopping, Claire. You've really not done it. Rather, you had been with one single organization and then you grew vertically within there. So what had really kept you interested, and what had been the thought process behind it?
So I had to think about that myself for a long while, because first of all, staying with the same company for many years does not mean staying in the same job or role. So this is something that I'm very grateful for, because if your company allow you to actually move across diverse teams and get exposed to different functions and expand your portfolio, and they believe in you and empower that's a blessing. It's not change for the sake of change, because if you're learning and growing, then you're changing even within the same company. But what would keep me in this role and in this function is actually the fact that it addresses my three cravings. So I what do I, as a person, passionate about? I'm passionate about connecting with people. I'm passionate about stories and creativity. And if you look at the role, this role is about people getting together to form a community. So that's the people, tick. And then those people who gather around the common core of values and goals and visions, and everyone bring in a story. And then your role is to tell the story creatively. So in a way, it is very dynamic, even if it's the same role, but it's very dynamic. You tell different stories every day. You deal with different people every day.
Right. And honestly, I think your team is really lucky to have you on board. You do have a very positive vibe to yourself, and I'm having a good time having this conversation. But now, if we kind of take the conversation in a little bit of a different direction, Claire, I want you to talk briefly about, first of all, the importance of having good core values, and then second of all, what are some of your personal core values that you uphold in your life?
Yeah. Um, I think the values are if you look at the anchor, if you look at this imagine those boats were parked on Erie Harbor. If they don't have this help that's holding them to the ground, these are what values are to me. They just ground you when the storm is there. Otherwise, you'll end up not even knowing where you settle. So values are the anchor. And as much as there are corporate values that are very much associated with companies and culture, every one of us have his own. And the closest those two come together, the happier the employer experience, which is my case. So my personal values, I would say are, I would try and pick some here. So I would start with authenticity, because for me, everything good comes out of that. So the moment you drift into anything that is not yourself, then that is the beginning of it. So authenticity is a key to me. I think respect is a no-brainer. I just think it's kind of a common foundation in many value systems. Respect, of course, respect. Be it respect for diversity, be it respect in the way you present yourself, in the way you speak up, respect. And courage. I think this world needs more courageous people. Courage is something that I have a lot of personal hunger for. I admire people who are able to stand out and say something different than the norm, not just for the sake of difference, but they stand out. So courage. And one very important value for me is humility. I think the way you gauge people morality is how they treat those they don't need. And humility is a key thing for me as well.
Right. I want to talk a bit more about courage here. It's a very interesting point, and yes, I understand that with the team that you're in across different companies, you guys get to have more airtime, and even as a differentiator from an engineering team, there's a lot of cool things going on. But then I want to talk a bit about the challenging parts of the job as well. Again, when you mentioned crisis management, that would of course be something very serious. So I want to talk about the fact that how would courage come into play when someone's faced with challenging times, or if we make it very specific to yourself, Claire, how do you keep yourself on your toes and very, very much forward looking when you're going through a crisis situation?
Those were like pretty combined questions. So the first was, how do I keep myself forward looking? When this was the last
So,
one.
like, how do you keep yourself hopeful that yes, you'll make out of a certain calamity, or let's say whenever you are going through a challenging time, either in your life or in career, how do you navigate through tough times, challenges slash failures?
Yeah. I think I said a bit of it in my very first question, is that never feel stuck, Nothing does not come to an end. So but that's more of a personal thing than the role. If you personally think that nothing stays with you forever, and every hardship eventually comes to an end, I don't think you're gonna get stuck. You know that you still acknowledge that this is not the happiest time. It's tough. It's challenging, and with all the crisis communication, sometimes it becomes a bit too much. I mean, our region had its share, right? And it's intense. It's sometimes too much. But then what makes it up is when you feel like, even though communication, you feel like a little helpless sometimes, but when you feel that how this makes a difference in people's life. When you do a solidarity message and you receive responses that this made a difference, even though people are going through something that's bigger than all of us, and the sum of us, like this massive earthquakes, or I don't know what, but then it's too tragic and you feel too small. And then you have two choices. Either you think, oh, but those are words, how good is that? Or you think, but those words are everything I have, so I'm going to be giving them genuinely, and putting all the effort I can to steer the organization, to encourage those who are facing this hardship, and send them good vibes and support them until this wave passes. So with crisis management, you need to be factual, you need to be agile, but you also need to remain very human, otherwise you become so mechanical and you don't connect. So as much as it requires agility and fast response and accuracy in the editorial work behind it and everything, but it's still very human at its core.
Right. It's very beautifully weaved into words, I must say. Now, if we were to talk about mentorship for a little bit, again, I would want you to talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship, first of all. And did you have any mentors while you were progressing, either vertically or horizontally in the career?
I was very lucky. I was personally very lucky in that. I mean, I didn't even have to seek mentors outside my direct leaders. I've been led by people who I learned a lot from. Very understanding, very human, and also very empowering. So yes, I did have mentors in many cases, as is this the case now. They are my direct managers, but it was a blessing. And even at times where my direct managers were not the kind of mentors I was seeking, I had others. And there are people who left the company 7 and 8 years back who were my mentors, and we still have, you know, occasional chats to talk about our careers and where we're going and so on. And I do think that you always need another perspective. Other here doesn't have to essentially mean more senior. It could mean more senior, but it also could mean that people who took different paths, so they were exposed to a different view than the one you are in now. So yeah, firm believer in mentorship, and actually we in Ericsson are always adopting that.
Right. So, other than that, I want to talk about some of the myths that might have gotten busted for you over the course of your professional journey.
Oh yes, many. I'm gonna have to focus on few that. Okay, the first myth is that when you say I don't know, you're not communicating. That's a myth. You know, many think that, but why are we communicating if we have nothing to say? But if you look at the amount of unknowns this world throws at us on daily basis, and the uncertainties, be it economically, environmentally, politically, you name it, you cannot just disappear because you don't know the impact of those changes on the organization yet. So if you as a leader just rise up and say, guys, I know this is top of mind, I know this is keeping you awake at night, me too, and I don't have the answers yet, and I promise I will give them as soon as I have them. That's a communication piece by itself. We think we need to only communicate when we have this happen and this is going to be the implication. No, myth. So that's the first. Second would be the myth that promptness is the most important part of communication, because sometimes when we're too prompt, we're actually not listening. When we're too fast, we're not processing. You know, our brain processes information with different biases. And if you reply too soon, it's the emotional part of your brain that is replying, not the part that has processed the information, understood it logically, and have a factual answer, reply for it. So I think we often listen to reply and not to understand. And sometimes we can say, I need a bit of time to think about that so I can come back to you. That's mainly on leadership communication, not mass communication, of course. And one third myth would be the fact that when you have a very limited budget, you don't produce quality or creative output. So we've tried that ourselves. When you're actually not able to use an external agency, or dream wild in how you want to revamp your communication channels, I mean, never underestimate the power of in-house development. If you have the right calibers, you have hired the right calibers who are learners, and you know their strength, you can eventually put their creative juices together and come up with something that actually outpaces this lack of budget you have, and no one would ever know that you didn't have a big budget at the end of the day. So I would stick to, I have more myths, but let's stick to those three for
Yeah.
now.
Perfect. And now that we're reaching the end of our conversation, I want to close on a note that taking your entire professional journey, what would be your eventual extract out of it for either students or early career professionals that could really help them in careers?
Okay, so students, experiment. Please experiment. The only wrong decision you can take is getting stuck with a wrong choice. Otherwise, it can't go wrong. So you never know enough about yourself until you try new things. So please experiment. And the second is, but that's not only for students, I think that's for all of us, is I think we need to have our own definition of concepts that really matters. Concepts like success, achievement, ambition, growth. Because if you don't have your own set of definitions, you're going to adopt someone else's. And a few years down the lane, you realize that you might not even be satisfied with where you are. So just have your own definitions for things. And for leaders, I think I personally aspire to live by servant leadership. Servant leadership thinks that you work for the people, not the people work for you. This is the core of it. So leaders, please realize that you work for your people. It's not the other way around. And when you work for someone, you are actually honored to be part of their story when they say it one day. So you've got to act this way with empowerment, with trust, with encouragement, because encouragement is always underrated. And one very important thing we talk about much is empathy, of course. So I think that these would be my 3 takeaways. And maybe a fourth, multitasking, huge myth. Don't fall for it. I wish someone told me that multitasking always compromises on quality and efficiency. Because, the way our brain works is that it does one thing at a time. We think we're smart when we're hopping, but we're actually not hopping seamlessly. We're losing the starting point of this task when you jump to the next. You're losing time, you're losing efficiency. And when you bounce back, you would actually start a little bit earlier than you think you left it. So maybe we need to focus. I wish someone told me this earlier. Maybe you need to focus on what you're doing, finish it off, or finish a milestone, and then hop. Don't multitask thinking that this doesn't compromise.
That is very profound, and thank you for sharing some great insights from your journey that could possibly help or empower other people in becoming or unleashing the true potential of themselves. So Claire, thank you once again for being here with us. We had a great time, and I hope our audience get to have a great time listening to the conversation. And as far as our audience in general are concerned, do engage with us in the comment section and tell us about what you think or what you might want to hear next. Do engage with us on topics about telecommunications as well. And I would love to have a chat about common questions that you might have either about career awareness or about telecommunications industry in general. So with that, this is your host Usama signing out, and I will catch you in the next episode. Thank you.